Viewers are advised that this episode contains themes of sexual violence. He was a predator in a police uniform. What he did is almost beyond belief.
He was someone you might see once every 1 to 2 decades. This guy is right out there on a limb.
Tonight, we reveal how this officer of the law was able to commit his despicable crimes for so long.
I find it absolutely extraordinary. Clearly, one of the most serious serial offenders that Western Australia has known.
Our investigation starts now. Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation. Perth, Western Australia. Between 2007 and 2019, this city was the hunting ground of a singularly monstrous sexual predator. His name, Adrian Moore. He was a West Australian police officer, drugging and brutally assaulting women he met on dating apps. Adrian Moore's crimes were grotesque. A judge described him as misogynistic, depraved and sadistic. It would take more than a decade before he was stopped and imprisoned for 30 years.
He said plenty of times, I have got high contacts, I will always be protected.
Over a dozen women are known to have been victims of this man in uniform. But it's believed there are many more, possibly hundreds, who are yet to come forward.
They silence victims, telling victims, I am the law. Who's going to believe you when I'm a police officer?
So why did the West Australian Police fail to detect one of the state's most vicious criminals, who just happened to be one of their own? The evidence we'll reveal tonight is both shocking and deeply troubling. Of appalling policing, unbelievable delays in pursuing Moore, and a police culture that seemingly protected him.
It is a case, I don't use the word lightly, a case of corruption.
Joining me, Judith Fordham, one of West Australia's leading criminal lawyers.
It is police officers protecting other police officers to the detriment of the members of the public who they are meant to serve.
That raises real questions with the competency of the organisation in which this evil psychopath was able to flourish.
Professor Ian Coyle, forensic psychologist. So it undermines our view of not just police officers, but an institution.
Absolutely.
We know for a fact that certain predators make a beeline for policing because they are manipulative, they're clever.
From London, Zoe Billingham, for more than a decade, an inspector with the UK's police watchdog.
He has this kind of God complex. He feels that he's totally untouchable.
And joining us exclusively tonight, one of Adrian Moore's victims, former police officer Nicole Edwards.
It was a long, hard run, and I think for me, speaking out, it is just based on the fact that this can't happen again.
I first met Nicole in Perth.
Sometimes you get turned right upside down.
She told me she and Adrian Moore found each other on a dating app in 2017. And because they were both in the force, Nicole trusted him and initially thought he was charming.
Look, he was friendly. I linked and communicated with him for a substantial amount of time before I actually met him. There was just a good laugh.
So pray.
Nicole invited Moore to her home for a meal. She felt nervous, and for good reason, because very quickly she discovered her guest was anything but charming. You're about to hear what happened to Nicole that night. confronting details which she believes are important to understanding the true gravity of Moore's crimes.
I remember him handing me a glass of red wine and he said, "Drink it and hurry up, I'm going to pour you another one." And I remember having a mouthful of it and going, "God, this tastes like shit." And then after that, I just start to feel strange. It's like when you're having an operation and being in hospital, and I just remember feeling weird.
Much of what occurred next is a blur, because Moore had secretly drugged Nicole and then brutally assaulted her hour upon hour for most of the night.
So this has probably happened over about a 10-hour period. And I remember, because there was a lot of blanks, so I remember him, I remember being struck across the face while sitting on the couch. My head hit the back wall and I remember thinking, I'm in trouble here. I remember thinking, I'm in trouble.
He's hit you so hard you've hit the wall.
Yeah. And then I remember he grabbed me by the hair, pulled me across the floor and put his penis inside my mouth and smashed my head down. And I remember thinking, I am going to die. I cannot breathe. As he's then urinated in my mouth and I am choking. And they're the two parts that I remember.
The next morning, when Moore had gone, Nicole saw in the bathroom mirror the horror that had been inflicted upon her.
I remember going in and I took my clothes off and I just stood there and looked at myself and because the injuries that I had were just horrific. And so I'd been cut right across here. I had it down my back, right down my whole body. I was bleeding from every orifice.
You were cut?
Yeah, so he used a horse whip. And so he had repeatedly struck me right up to the back of my neck, right across my back. So it took several months for that to go away because I had welts and bleeding welts all over me.
Moore not only subjected Nicole to physical control and abuse, he also had psychological control of her and other victims we've spoken to. The drugs he used left them confused and unsure what had happened. But some felt fearful and terrible shame, and if challenged, Moore threatened to release explicit images he'd earlier coerced them into. His cruel manipulation of them ensured he wasn't reported.
Total betrayal of trust. The monster.
This woman came to know Moore in 2016 and has chosen to remain anonymous. Like Nicole, she met him via a dating app, and at times he would wear his police uniform when he came to visit.
Words can't even, I can't even put it to words some days. What he did, the trust and just, it's unimaginable, to think that he could have done that.
She too was drugged.
Once he would drug you, then he controlled everything you did. He had that power. It was a full 100% control.
Both AFL fans, she and Moore watched the grand final at her home. He brought streamers and balloons, food and drink, and other more sinister items. And in that scene of celebration, Moore then subjected her to the most depraved assault. His abuse was horrific, separating her legs by fastening an iron bar between her ankles, slapping her violently and repeatedly, and much more. He videoed it all without her knowledge, and even though barely conscious and having no memory of the abuse, she can be heard asking Moore to stop. It was only years later, when police discovered the hundreds of thousands of Moore's shocking videos, that she saw for herself what he did.
Once I saw the videos of what had happened, and the realisation and knowing what day it was, because you could hear it in the background on the TV. To know I had said no, told him I didn't like things, told him to stop, and he was hurting me, and for him to have total disregard. I had no control.
Ian Coyle, these are the sorts of crimes for a forensic psychologist like you, I imagine, ring enormous alarm bells.
Huh, that's an understatement.
According to Ian Coyle, the total control Moore had over his victims fueled his depravity and his delusion that somehow they were willing participants.
This villain, he is incapable of emotion in the way that we experience it. He is incapable of remorse. He is incapable of feeling sorrow or pity for another human being. What he wants to do is good, and if you try to stop him, that's bad. He is untreatable. He was, from a forensic psychological perspective, someone you might see once every 1 to 2 decades. This guy is right out there on a limb.
Adrian Moore's actions are viewed as those of a psychopath, coolly and meticulously planning his crimes, using his police skills, even police computers, to gather information on his victims. And the videos he recorded were all for his own pleasure.
They're trophies. His trophy are the videos. That's a big one. And he can keep playing them and feel how wonderful he felt at the time.
And he can do that again and again and again with woman after woman, presents himself as a police officer, goes on a dating app, checks them out on the police computer, knows something about them, knows how to press their buttons, and they drop their guard because he is a police officer in whom we place trust.
Coming up,
Over here, we've had a similar terrible case.
the monsters of the London Met.
He was getting away with it for 17 years.
And the longer he went undetected, the more his mind would be saying to him, I can get away with all of this.
How they and Adrian Moore escaped justice for so long.
The only thing I can think of is that he had protection from someone in high places.
That's next on Under Investigation. Tonight, we're investigating the case of Adrian Moore, one of Australia's most prolific and brutal serial rapists.
He used a horsewhip. I'd been cut right across here. I had it down my back, right down like my whole body. I was bleeding from every orifice.
An officer in the Western Australian Police Force for more than 30 years, Moore was someone whom his victims believed would protect them, not assault them.
Total betrayal of trust. The monster.
Well, it tells you he has this kind of God complex, doesn't he? He feels that he's totally untouchable, wholly invincible.
You might expect a psychopathic predator working as a police officer would be most unusual, but unfortunately it is not.
Over here, we've had a similar terrible case of a police officer who used the cloak of policing to basically prey on women.
Zoe Billingham, a former inspector with the UK's police watchdog for 12 years, is bringing her experience and knowledge to our investigation. London's version of Adrian Moore was David Carrick, an officer with the Metropolitan Police.
A serial rapist who used his position first to seduce and then to scare his victims into staying silent.
Over a 17-year period, he also used dating apps to target and rape women. In all, 12 victims would give evidence in court. There was also another predator.
A man who, under the guise of his duty as a police officer, picked Sarah Everard up in the street as she walked home from a friend's house.
Metropolitan Officer Wayne Cousins, who abducted, raped and strangled to death 33-year-old marketing executive Sarah Everard in 2021.
The news today that it was a Metropolitan Police officer has sent shockwaves and anger through the public and through the net.
Zoe says their police uniforms gave both men the cover they needed.
We know about Wayne Couzens, who killed Sarah Everard, that he absolutely used the accoutrements of policing office, his warrant card, his handcuffs, in order to perpetrate his crimes. And Carrick, similarly, when he subjugated women, beat them, locked them in cupboards under stairs and urinated on them, his belief was that he was invincible. He told the women, I'm a police officer. Who are they going to believe? Are they going to believe you or me?
The public's outrage was palpable.
Who protects us from you?
And a year-long independent inquiry revealed last year that predators like Couzens and Carrick often join the force in order to commit their terrible crimes.
We know for a fact that certain predators, psychopaths, make a beeline for policing because they are manipulative, they're clever, they prey on victims, they silence victims, telling victims, I am the law.
So chillingly similar were Adrian Moore's crimes in Western Australia that tonight we're using the UK experience to assist our investigation, to try and discover how Moore escaped justice for so long.
Did he wear his uniform to your home, for example?
Yeah.
One of Moore's victims told me he used many of the same tactics as the monsters of the London Met.
So he was very visibly the police officer?
Yeah, definitely. He would finish work at 7 a.m. and turn up at my place.
He would want you to see him in his police uniform, I presume.
Mm-hmm. That was, part of him being dominant.
And just like the predatory police exposed in the UK, Moore not only traded on his position of trust, he also used his police training to ensure he left no evidence at his crime scenes. Moore brought along a black bag packed with his instruments of sexual torture, which also carried the drug he used on his victims, the alcohol he served it in, even the glasses.
When he turned up to my house with the black bag and I asked him what it was, he told me to mind my own business, that I wasn't to go anywhere near it. And then I had no idea and I have no memory.
Also in Moore's black bag, bleach to forensically clean the scenes of his terrible attacks.
Ian, he's planning. That's all part of his joy, is it?
Yes. Yes.
Forensic psychologist Professor Ian Coyle says all of Moore's actions, mirrored by the police predators in the UK, were for sexual gratification, designed to ensure total control of his victims.
The planning of inflicting pain, being totally dominant over someone, that gives him enormous pleasure. He can decide whether they live or die. He can decide whether they hurt a little bit or hurt massively.
He seems to have tapped into the most evil parts of what some human beings are capable of. And the longer he went undetected, the more his mind would be saying to him, I can get away with all of this. I am invincible.
As we've revealed, Moore's manipulation of his drugged and confused victims ensured for a long time he would not be reported.
Once he would drug you, then he controlled everything you did. He had that power. It was a full 100% control. Because if I knew what he was doing to me, if I knew the extent of that, there is no way he would have ever been back in my house.
But after more than a decade, Adrian Moore's sadistic crime spree should have come to an end, when in January 2018, another female police officer he'd attacked reported him to Internal Affairs, the West Australian Police Unit, whose role it is to investigate its own force. The investigators seized Moore's computer and found thousands of shocking videos and images of his victims. And officers viewed them and saw what Moore had done.
Then when Internal Affairs came and saw me, they sat with me, asked some questions and whether I knew him, how I'd met him.
But unbelievably, rather than asking her about the videos, officers seemed only interested in Moore's misuse of police computers, which he used to illegally access information about his victims.
I did let them know that I was aware or fairly certain that he had accessed mine. I know that he was looking at my licence, he was looking at my car rego. So it was more predominantly in regards to the police database, him accessing that.
Despite having the videos, the damning evidence in their hands, Moore was charged not for his brutal sex crimes, but only for illegally accessing the police database. In February 2019, Moore was found guilty and sentenced to 6 months in prison. He was also fined for possessing images of bestiality.
It just beggars belief, really, doesn't it? I find it inconceivable that the police could have thought that that was an appropriate way of dealing with what was clearly one of the most serious serial offenders, probably, that Western Australia has known.
With Moore behind bars, any further investigation of his crimes appeared to be glacially slow. And, unforgivably, police failed to advise his victims of the degrading images they'd found, not even fellow police officer Nicole Edwards.
I was never contacted, and in the videos that he took of in the offences against me itself, there would be between 20 or 30 times where during those videos he said to me, "What is your PD number?" So obviously my police number. "What is your full name? Which section do you work in?" And throughout the entire video, he has asked me to say that. So they had there was no point that they could come and say, "We didn't know who you were."
Learning Moore had been arrested only for computer breaches, Nicole decided to report his assaults. And it was then when an officer told her of Moore's videos and that she was also one of many women seen in them.
He tells me that they have over 200 women on video that they have seen, and that they'd contacted some but not the others.
Police also told Nicole they believed she had consented to Moore's unspeakable acts, even though she was clearly drugged.
They did say to me, "You looked a bit intoxicated. We think that you were consenting to what was happening." At this stage, I haven't seen the videos or the photos.
Zoe, I can see you shaking your head, but what is this telling you?
It's just incredible, isn't it? And, you don't have to be a police expert to understand that the police have got evidence. They can identify women who have been subject to horrendous abuse from that evidence seized in the videotapes. They can see that crimes have been committed against women. The only conclusion you can draw from this as an objective observer is that the police force in Western Australia was drawing up the barricades in order to protect its own.
Coming up, imprisoned, released.
He was going to progress.
Then Moore strikes again.
There was over 1,000 videos of her as well.
Did I hear you correctly? 1,000 videos of one victim? This just gets worse.
That's next on Under Investigation. Tonight, we're investigating the horrific crimes of serial rapist Adrian Moore, a West Australian police officer who used his uniform and his training to brutally assault dozens of women over the course of more than a decade.
He seems to have tapped into the most evil parts of what some human beings are capable of.
We've shown the frightening parallels between Adrian Moore's terror spree in Western Australia and similar crimes in the UK, where the so-called monsters of the Met sparked a far-reaching public inquiry with chilling revelations.
There's a massive problem that needs to be solved, and resources need to be deployed to stopping these monsters getting into policing in the first place.
In Western Australia, even when the Police Internal Affairs Unit discovered Moore's trove of degrading videos documenting his assaults, shockingly, he was charged only with illegally accessing police computers.
It just beggars belief, really, doesn't it?
Moore was sentenced to 6 months prison, but he was soon back out in the community. Perhaps because of the inexplicable view by police that the women on Moore's disturbing videos may have consented to their assaults, his movements went unchecked. And in October 2019, with awful predictability, Moore, the sex predator and no longer a police officer, struck again, drugging and attacking yet another woman. Of the hundreds of women Moore is suspected of assaulting, she was his 13th known victim. Ian Coyle, for Moore, what's his mindset now?
His mindset now, or at that time, the only thing I can think of that makes any sense is that he had protection from someone in high places. And the only way to get to the bottom of that is to have a proper, in-depth commission of inquiry like they did in the UK.
The WA Police and its Internal Affairs Unit had failed to investigate properly Moore's sex crimes. Incredibly, it took the courage of one of the women he assaulted to force the hand of the police hierarchy. Nicole Edwards blew the whistle on the Internal Affairs investigation by contacting the Crime and Corruption Commission, West Australia's police watchdog. It was a move that put the blowtorch to a case that had stalled for reasons that are difficult to understand. So you had to step outside the system, which was the big stick. Yeah. And that was what progressed the investigation.
Yes, it was.
For you to have to go outside to the Corruption and Crime Commission in order to get some sort of result, I mean, I take my hat off to you. I'm not sure I would be brave enough. But they count on that. They count on the fact that you don't want to be publicly humiliated, which is part of the deal if you're going to take official action.
Finally, nearly 2 years after the first official complaint was lodged, the investigation was moved from Internal Affairs and handed to the Sexual Assault Squad. And it was only then when many victims would see for the first time in the hundreds of thousands of videos what Moore did to them.
I was contacted by the Sexual Assault Squad. It became apparent that the severity of the videos were far more than what I could have ever imagined.
For the women Moore had brutalised while they were drugged, it would be a life-changing moment. You had to look at the videos?
Yes.
How difficult was that?
It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, to sit there beside someone that you know has already seen all the images. And then as it progressed, the severity of things that you had no idea, and seeing yourself in a way that's not like you. Your eyes are just totally on another planet. Your speech is just, you can hardly understand, and you're struggling to speak, and you can see that you're struggling to speak and really got no idea what's going on around you. And now to be sitting here as being a survivor of one of Australia's worst serial rapists, I could never have imagined the impact it would have on myself, my family, and my friends that are aware of what's happened.
The horror stories grew. Yet another woman we have spoken to, and who had known Moore a decade earlier, said she was left devastated when she too watched the shocking videos. Images she had no knowledge of and which she found simply overwhelming. Something fellow survivor Nicole Edwards understands all too well.
There was over 1,000 videos of her as well.
And she knew nothing about them?
She knew nothing about them.
Did I hear you correctly? 1,000 videos of one victim? This just gets worse.
The same woman told us in a statement that the long delay waiting for police to finally, properly investigate Moore's crimes was years of hell. I nearly died, literally, she said. I'm angry. Nothing will ever take away the pain of this. Nicole, she was suicidal.
There's been a number of them have had suicidal attempts, and I have myself. We have all spoken about that. You know, it's
this lack of action.
Absolutely. They've got to look at what they did and what they overlooked, and the trauma that they have given everyone, and the fight that everyone had to go through. Then to see videos of themselves being brutally sexually assaulted and not even knowing that they were in existence.
In March 2020, more than 2 years after police first discovered the video evidence of his crimes, Adrian Moore was charged with 87 serious sex offences. 13 women, including Nicole Edwards and the anonymous victims whom we've spoken to, gave evidence. And in December 2022, a jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to 30 years jail. The judge said his offences were unprecedented and not comparable to any other case that had come before the courts in Western Australia.
Certainly in this case, I think we can say he was going to progress. His crimes had got worse. The pain, the physical damage he was inflicting had increased. And I think it likely that if he had been able to continue on, he would have started murdering people.
100%, yes.
Coming up,
It is police officers protecting other police officers.
Our investigation reveals Adrian Moore was not alone.
The old saying, birds of a feather flock together, springs to mind.
Zoe, is it impossible for the hierarchy not to know?
No, absolutely not.
That's next on Under Investigation. Adrian Moore's assaults of women were cruel and calculating, made all the worse by the fact he was a serving Western Australian police officer.
What he did, the trust, it's unimaginable. Like, to think that he could have done that.
We've revealed the inexplicable decisions made by WA Police, their delay in charging him for his depraved crimes despite having so much evidence, only to see Moore claim another victim just months after he walked free from being jailed for computer crimes.
The only thing I can think of that makes any sense is that he had protection from someone in high places.
Tonight, we've also examined the crimes of the so-called monsters of the Met, the London police predators whose convictions sparked an independent inquiry, resulting in some disturbing revelations.
It's institutionally racist, homophobic and misogynistic, that people turn a blind eye. We hear testimony of female police officers who feel cowed into submission in not speaking out because they will be ostracised rather than the individual that's perpetrating these crimes. So these deep-rooted cultural issues have actually created a crisis for policing in the UK.
That knowledge gleaned from the UK inquiry has our experts asking the same questions here of Western Australian police. Whether a toxic culture within the force inevitably hid terrible truths, allowing a predator like Moore to flourish and potentially affording him protection, even at the very top. From where you sit and what you've experienced and seen, is it impossible for the hierarchy not to know?
No, absolutely not. Anyone at the top of the office in Western Australia who has seen the evidence that we've talked about, but has also looked across to the other side of the world and what's happened in the UK, and it's astonishing the parallels. They must be thinking, they must know it can't possibly stop at this one individual.
And our investigation reveals there are others. We've discovered at least 2 more serious sexual offenders in the WA police force. One is Keith Hopkin, an officer who would change his name to Keith Zhao. In 2019, Zhao was convicted of indecently assaulting a female police officer at work. And Perth criminal lawyer Judith Fordham believes it's possible Zhao also had links with Adrian Moore.
That's right. I've been told that Zhao, then known as Keith Hopkin, worked with Adrian Moore, and at that point, Hopkin, or Zhao, was into things like bondage and bestiality and that sort of thing. And then we have this younger man with him, we now know to be Adrian Moore, and, you know, that's scary because evidently, according to my source, everybody knew about it.
In Coyle, you would say that it's not a surprise that individuals who have a predilection for specific sexual behaviour would find each other.
Yeah, well, the old saying, birds of a feather flock together, springs to mind.
As a serving police officer, Nicole Edwards, the victim who forced a proper investigation into Adrian Moore's assaults, says she witnessed firsthand a toxic and sexual police culture.
As a female in the job, it was either you just laugh about it or you put yourself in a difficult position where you speak out, and then it just costs you your career, it costs you your position going forward.
Was that a perception, or did you see that happening?
No, I saw that happen, and it happened to me.
Reports by Nicole and others of misogyny and a toxic culture in the WA force are deeply concerning. And it begs the question about what those in charge knew.
It's part of the job of the police hierarchy from the top down to have your finger on the pulse and to know what's going on and be proactive about it. And if they didn't know at the time, they should have known.
But we can reveal Adrian Moore believed he had protection from senior police officers. And it's a claim Nicole Edwards says Moore made to her when she began questioning him about his actions.
He said plenty of times, like, I have got high contacts, I will always be protected, so you need to be quiet, just carry on.
According to one of his victims, Moore said he had photographs of a senior female police officer. He made the same claim to Nicole Edwards and boasted it gave him protection.
He was really self-assured. He never thought for a minute, it seems, that you or others were going to bring him down.
He was very confident that he was never going down. He had a list of police officers that he had been with, and he provided those lists so, you know, to get the other police officers to know that, you know, they couldn't go anywhere with it because he had a high-ranking contacts. He was just forever what he believed to be in the strongest place.
Protected.
Yeah.
We expect police to protect, to serve, to uphold a decent standard in society, not to be no better or even worse than the criminals they are supposed to be putting their energies in to catch and deal with. I find it horrifying.
In the UK, a public inquiry found both the depth of the corruption and the numbers of officers exposed in the London Metropolitan Police were extraordinary.
Incredibly, there's 1,000 police officers either suspended or on restricted duty in the Metropolitan Police right here today.
And Zoe Billingham says it's reasonable to be concerned that the same could apply in WA.
Who would have ever thought that the scale of the problem was as vast as it actually is over here in London? And what's to say that the scale of the problem, I hate to say this, that you have in Western Australia isn't equivalent? There needs to be a really serious spotlight now shone on that police force, and people from outside need to come in and look at what's happening.
Coming up,
It made me forever sad that I had to fight so hard for it to go where it did.
the bravery of Adrian Moore's victims.
One of my reasons for coming forward is to be a voice for all of the survivors.
Now it's a make or break moment for the Western Australian Police.
The public deserves to be able to have trust in the police force.
Until you accept the problem that you have, you're not going to solve it.
That's next on Under Investigation.
We expect police to protect, to serve.
Tonight, we've investigated the shocking case of Adrian Moore, the West Australian police officer convicted of over 80 brutal sexual attacks. 13 women gave evidence against him, but it's believed his victims, which included fellow police officers, may number in the hundreds.
He used a horsewhip. I'd been cut right across here. I had it down my back, right down like my whole body. I was bleeding from every orifice.
There are many aspects of this case that are hard to comprehend. The extraordinary decision by WA Police not to charge Moore for his depraved sexual assaults when it found hundreds of thousands of videos and images he had kept of his crimes. A delay that saw him able to attack again. And we've exposed evidence of a toxic culture within the Western Australian Police Force that seemed to offer cover, perhaps even protection, for Adrian Moore.
The only thing I can think of is that it is a case, I don't use the word lightly, a case of corruption.
Although Moore is now serving 30 years behind bars, his victims are still left with many unanswered questions, adding to the immeasurable suffering they've already experienced.
It's hard to come forward and speak out, and I totally understand, and I know that not everyone is able to, and that is partly why one of my reasons for coming forward is to be a voice for all of the survivors. So people are aware of what's happened and what he got away with for so long, what investigations weren't done.
And victims want to know why it was left to Nicole Edwards to blow the whistle before the West Australian Police conducted a thorough investigation.
It made me forever sad that I had to fight so hard for it to go where it did. Because they were my organisation, my employers, and they should never, ever have sat there and watched that and not have taken this any further. I should never have had to keep going back to them.
I really commend Nicole for her extraordinary bravery for stepping forward and not only taking this case through, but actually having the courage to talk about this publicly. I can only begin to imagine the trauma that she suffered and has to re-suffer in telling the story.
The fallout is that many women who fell prey to Moore want an apology about how the investigation was conducted and the impact it's had on so many of their lives. Ian, what do we need to be doing?
There needs to be an independent inquiry, preferably run by someone from outside of Western Australia, and we need to look at the whole management ethos, the management climate of the West Australian Police.
But we need a Royal Commission.
We need a Royal Commission.
The public deserves to have not only what occurred here and went wrong here in terms of investigation exposed, but the public deserves to be able to have trust in the police force.
A Royal Commission seems imperative if we're to get to the bottom of questions raised by the disturbing case of Adrian Moore. Chris Dawson, a highly decorated WA police officer and former police commissioner, is now the state's governor. And as governor, it is Dawson who would sign off on a Royal Commission.
There's only one way forward, really, isn't there, for this police force?
For Zoe Billingham, having witnessed the public's horror at London's own uniformed predators and hearing the terrible revelations that came from an unprecedented public inquiry, this is, she believes, a make-or-break moment for the West Australian police force.
If they're ever going to rebuild trust, and that's a big if, they're going to have to call in people from outside the police force to do a whole-scale investigation, just as we did over here. And until you accept the problem that you have, you're not going to solve it. What reassurance can there possibly be for women in Western Australia that there aren't other monsters like Moore hiding in plain sight within policing?
If you are in Western Australia and you need assistance, please contact the Sexual Assault Research Centre on 1800 199 888. If what you've heard tonight raises issues for you, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14. And if you have any information on any aspect of the Adrian Moore case, you can contact us on our confidential email under investigation9@protonmail.com. I want to thank you all very much for joining me. It's been a really terrible conversation to have, but a really important one, and I appreciate all of your input tonight. And I thank you. I'm Liz Hayes. Good night. Hello, I'm Liz Hayes, and thank you for watching Under Investigation. Subscribe to our channel now for exclusive clips, and don't miss out on full episodes of Under Investigation on 9Now and the 9Now app.